pathogens that can infect people, but most of them are very uncommon. But over time, as humans become really the dominant species on the planet, and we have contact with a lot more animals and insects and new ecosystems, we will become infected with new agents, and that is happening throughout the course of history, and I don't think that's going to change.
All right, so there are a lot of us now, which is part of the problem. Is there anything we're doing which is also part of the problem?
Well, I think the way we use our environment is supporting transmission of mosquitoes. We have a lot of rubbish and containers often around houses that create pools of standing water where the mosquitoes can breed. And obviously the density of human populations is very, very high, particularly in informal settlements around huge cities, and many people living in poverty. So we are creating the perfect conditions to support transmission of this kind of infection.
All right, thank you. Professor Michael Baker on the panel, 6 minutes to 5 o'clock. High house prices in Auckland are affecting the returns of property investors, as was said might well happen on the panel last year and in other places by other people too. Crocker's researchers say that, for example, if you bought a property in Auckland at the median price of $734,000 and then rented it out at $500 a week, you'd be getting a 3.5% return before expenses. So, Alan, you may as well have your money on term deposit.
Yeah, that would probably be good for the housing problems in Auckland as well. I think property investors have had a great run, especially in Auckland. They've made a lot of money, and that the good times like that seem to be coming to an end, and that's partly because that's the way of economic cycles, and it's partly because of the extra brakes that the Reserve Bank put on that just came into effect before Christmas, where, you know, we've talked about loan-to-value ratios where people have to have a 20% deposit to buy a house. If you're a property investor, you have to have a 30% deposit to buy a house. Yeah. And just things like that, and it is slowing down. So, yeah, I think there'll be fewer people that will be buying property to invest in. One thing that does bug me, though, with all these surveys, and it's probably the media's fault, I'm blaming the media for a lot today, sorry, is that people talk about falling property prices, and what I say is property prices aren't going to fall, they're just going to stop going up at the same rate. You know, in Auckland they've gone up, 10%, 15% a year, so they might start going up only at 5%, but they're not. I don't actually believe they're going to fall.
We're going to have a marvellous soft landing.
Yes.
Far better returns now, reports the NBR today, in Wellington and Christchurch, nearly 5%, and nearly 5.5% in Dunedin. For obvious reasons, you know, you don't have to pay so much. And rents for 2-bedroom houses have risen more quickly than for 3-bedroom houses in Auckland. In the end, though, will this be the main reason that Auckland house prices will turn? Because there are people who got out of the game last year in Auckland. They're buying places like Kākoi.
I don't think it'll be the only reason, and then they're not going to turn. So you've just proved what I was just saying before. They're not going to turn. They're going to just slow. But anyway, this is going to be a large part of it, but it's not going to be the only reason. People are actually going to realise it's not. I mean, I think Auckland's wonderful, and I love living here, and I have to for my job. But lots of people are going to realise that actually they don't need to live here. It's ridiculously expensive. What was the demography thing that came out? 9.7 times our salary to get a house. That it's stupid, and you can live quite happily elsewhere. So we might see growing house price growth, if that makes sense, or increased house price growth in other centres, and Auckland slows.
Any comment from the mainland?
Just one thing was, you were talking about the increase in houses and cost of houses in Christchurch and Dunedin. It'll be really interesting to see what happens to the market once things calm down with regards to the housing stock after the quakes. Yeah. You know, we lost a huge number of houses, a huge demand for rents. You know, we were paying over $700 for a 3-bedroom place for a year or so, and that was pretty standard in the market. Down here, that's really expensive in Christchurch. So there's been odd things that have affected the market. So it will be interesting to see what happens when it starts.
Tourists come to New Zealand because of an environmental promise, and we are breaking that promise, is one quote. So the Tourism Export Council is supporting the Choose Clean Water tour, which is visiting lakes and rivers around the country to document how continuing pollution of waterways is affecting the environment. Whether they are shocked or not, I don't know, because shocked is such a standard reaction, isn't it? But should they be dismayed? Do you think tourists mind cows bathing in lakes? Might they find it charmingly pastoral?
I think it would look really cute, but that said, I'm not a farmer or someone. Yeah, it's not a good thing, really, is it? You know, I think we all need to agree that it's polluting water and it's not a good thing. I think maybe we're getting a little bit up in arms about it. We don't know how many cows and how often and that kind of thing.
I'm really big on this, actually, Alan. So I think it's absolutely appalling, criminal. We're finding in a lot of areas. I think West Melton might be the latest one. Someone will correct me if I'm wrong. That there are increasing circumstances of E. coli being found in drinking water because we've got such a sort of an alluvial system as far as our water goes and our water table goes. It's very easy for water to drain through into, or polluted water to drain through into our water table. And we have the best water in the country in Canterbury and Christchurch. There's no smell of chlorine when we turn our taps on, and the last thing we want is cows standing in rivers. It's just gobsmacking to me that this is allowed to continue. When it is proven, it needs to be jumped on quickly and very strongly.
Aside from cows in lakes and rivers, in many ways we aren't especially clean and green. I mean, you just mentioned E. coli, but there's the Rere rock slide in Gisborne in the news. 500,000 YouTube views, because it looks sensational, doesn't it? I've never been there, but people career down it.
It looks amazing fun when you look at the clips, yeah.
It does, doesn't it? Unless you graze your knee or your leg, but people career down it on surfboards, and it looks glorious. But Ali, it's too contaminated with E. coli, often to swim in.
Well, I mean, you've got to look at what's happening around it. I can't comment on something outside of the Canterbury area, but I know that a lot of the farming activity down here on land that is not actually made for, or land that doesn't and shouldn't support dairy farming. I mean, a lot of the sheep farming, the horticultural industry and businesses, they've become dairy. And the land just isn't made for that. And my husband's a fisherman, and he goes out often and he sees the damage in the rivers. He sees how little water there is, and man, you just got to watch the flying Vegemite jar in the morning when he opens the paper and sees cows standing in rivers. It is a really big issue here.
Are we trying to have it both ways, and inevitably will come a cropper? We're trying to get the tourist dollar in because we need it, especially with the dairy receipts down, but at some stage is the day of reckoning, do you think?
No, I think we just need to enforce the rules and the laws and welcome the tourists in as well. Why can't we do both?
All right. Very good. Alan Reid, lovely to have you on the panel.
Pleasure.
Back in 2016. And Ali Jones, you too.
Yeah, good to be here, Jim. Thank you.
And thanks to everybody. The panel is back tomorrow, and Checkpoint follows with John Campbell.
Kia ora everyone, welcome to Checkpoint with John Campbell on RNZ National. We're on the radio, screening live on Freeview Channel 50 and streaming live on the RNZ website. However you're doing so, thank you for joining us tonight. An extraordinary night inside the TPP to the crucial details. The dispute resolution system, ISDS, it's controversial, but can decisions be appealed? No spin, no politics, just yes or no. We have the latest of what's happening at the signing on Thursday and what may be the smallest porphyry to greet such a gathering in New Zealand. We reveal the challenger in the flag referendum is coming down from Auckland Harbour Bridge. Why? An Australian Prime Minister promised to support Helen Clark's bid for UN Secretary General if she makes one. And an Australian Foreign Minister says, nobody told me. And Ted Cruz has taken Iowa from Donald Trump. Jane Patterson is there. We join her shortly. A big night. Let's begin with Katrina Batten and RNZ News.
Kia ora, good evening. A Ngāpuhi Kuia has invited the Prime Minister to attend Waitangi commemorations at Te Ti Marae. But some iwi leaders say Te Whai Harawera has gone against the wishes of the majority. Te Manu Kōrehi reporter Lee Marama McLaughlin has more.
About 60 people debated today whether John Key will be welcomed on Te Ti Marae if he signs the Trans-Pacific Partnership deal on Thursday. An elder, Kingi Taurua, says most people voted to not invite the Prime Minister, but the Te Ti Marae Trust later decided to ignore the vote. Te Whai Harawera says there was heated debate and lots of shouting, but the trustees and those who lived there decided the porphyry will go ahead. She says the government will come on as always and answer the questions put to it by the people. Kuli Marama McLaughlin, tēnei.
There's still some confusion over the invitation, with the Prime Minister saying he won't go to Waitangi on Friday if he's not allowed to speak on Te Tii Marae. John Campbell says Marae trustees are meeting tonight to agree on their position.
Te Tii Marae is the gateway to Waitangi and the treaty grounds. Therefore, if I'm not welcome or not permitted to speak at the Lower Marae, I have no intention of gate-crashing events at Waitangi. If that is the case, I would celebrate New Zealand's National Day in another part of the country.
John Campbell says whether other ministers would attend Waitangi would be based on if he goes. A Māori welcome will be extended to guests at the Trans-Pacific Partnership signing in Auckland, but it will be small and simple. Just 3 or 4 people will perform the welcome, and spokesperson Taime Te Rangi says it's a whakatau, not a pōwhiri. That means there'll be no wero or challenge. Mr Te Rangi says he'll perform the speech on behalf of the tribe, not the government. Auckland Council workers are being told to avoid the city centre if they can during demonstrations against the TPP. Several protests in Hikoi are expected to march up Queen Street and end at Sky City, where the agreement is said to be signed. The Auckland Council has advised staff that if they can work somewhere other than at their headquarters near Sky City, then they should. The Council's Chief Operating Officer, Dean Kimpton, says that's to avoid disruption rather than concern about safety. However, he says there'll be security guards posted at 2 council offices nearby on the day. Senator Ted Cruz has beaten billionaire Donald Trump in Iowa's presidential nominating contest, upsetting the national frontrunner in the race to be the Republican Party's White House nominee. Mr Cruz won with 28% of the vote compared to 24% for Mr Trump. Marco Rubio, a Florida senator, came in 3rd place with 23%, making him easily the leader among establishment candidates. He says the vote is a step towards the presidency.
Tonight we have taken the first step, but an important step, towards winning this election. If I am our nominee, and I will be our nominee thanks to what you have done here in this great state, when I am our nominee, we are going to unify this party and we are going to unify the conservative movement.
Marco Rubio. In the Democratic vote, CNN reports former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton holds a razor-thin margin with 49.9% of the votes to Senator Bernie Sanders' 49.4%. An administrator whose job was given to someone else when she took leave for cancer treatment has lost her case for unfair dismissal. Corrine Tripe must instead pay her former company $3,000 after an email she sent telling her boss about the treatment was ruled to be a form of resignation. Our employment reporter Max Toll has more.
Mrs Tribe was employed by the Auckland timber product manufacturer J. Scott & Company until late 2014. When she told her boss she needed several months off to have her tongue reconstructed, she also said she hoped her job would still be available when she returned, but understood if they hired someone else. She refused to confirm her resignation in writing, but the company quickly hired someone else. She took her case to the Employment Relations Authority, which ruled her email was effectively a resignation. She was ordered to pay the company's legal costs. This is Max Toll.
Tourists travelling to Northland are being advised by locals not to drink the water in the small town of Kyle. Helen Owens from Kyle Farm and Fuel says the water, which is supplied by a private company, is brown and has an odd smell. She says most locals are on roof tank water and wouldn't dream of drinking from the public taps.
Tourists that come into town, especially cyclists and backpackers that want to fill water bottles from any of the outside taps, we advise them not to because of the colour and the smell and the unknown quality of it. What we advise them to do is go to the next point where they're going to be staying and get tank supplied water.
Helen Owens says she and her husband intended to install a public drinking fountain at their service station when they bought it, but decided not to when they saw what was coming out of the taps. In sport, spin bowler Ish Sodhi has been rushed into the Black Caps camp at the last minute as the New Zealand cricketers prepare to open their one-day campaign against Australia in Auckland tomorrow. Following the Black Caps one-day series win over Pakistan at Eden Park on Sunday, the 23-year-old leg spinner has been called into the squad as a backup spin option. The New Zealand captain Brendan McCullum says the drop in pitch at Eden Park was slower and the ball turned more than what he expected against Pakistan.
We wanted that ability to choose the extra spin bowler if need be, and hence why he was drafted into the squad. we'll have a look at the wicket in the morning or in the afternoon when we arrive down here, and then we'll try and work out what we think is the best team to pick on the conditions that we're presented with.
Brenda McCullum. Meanwhile, Usman Khawaja has been left out of Australia's side in the opening one-dayer. Sean Marsh will instead open the batting for the visitors. The Cronulla Sharks outside back Valentine Holmes has been told to stay at home while his side contest this weekend's Auckland NRL Nines after a late-night incident led to the 20-year-old being banned from Queensland State of Origin duty for 12 months. Holmes was fined over $1,400 Australian earlier this week after getting into an altercation with police in Brisbane on Sunday morning while he was taking part in a Queensland Emerging Origin players camp. And World Rugby has announced details of the first ever official global ranking system for women's Test rugby, with New Zealand the first team to top the rankings. That's the news.
Tackling the Zika outbreak.
I am now declaring a public health emergency of international concern.
No budging on the TPP.
We've got an agreement. We tend to stick to the agreement, and the advice we have on the agreement that we've got is that the impact on New Zealand's pharmaceutical cost is potentially zero.
And the earth moves on the east coast.
Nothing fell over or anything like that, just a sort of a good Eastern Bay of Plenty wake-up call.
The Movers and Shakers on Morning Report with Susie Ferguson and Guy Espiner, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, could desert plants like cacti help power the world? And after 10, British novelist Jasper Fforde on puns, absurdity and the crazy gathering in his honour, the Ford Fiesta. Join me, Catherine Ryan, from 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met service weather to midnight tomorrow for Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula. Fine spells, isolated light showers developing tonight. Waikato to Whanganui, including Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Fine spells, isolated showers during the afternoons and evenings. Manawatu to Kapiti, mostly cloudy but some fine breaks in the afternoons. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Wellington, fine with areas of morning cloud and a few light morning showers about East Cape. Marlborough, Nelson, Buller, Westland and Canterbury, fine apart from isolated showers about the ranges during the afternoons and evenings. Fiordland and Stewart Island, mostly cloudy with patchy drizzle, clearing from Stewart Island tomorrow morning and from Fiordland in the evening. Southland and Otago, mainly fine but isolated showers during the afternoons and evenings. The Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. It's 5:09.
Thanks, Katrina. So much to discuss tonight. Cruz takes it off Trump in Iowa, less than half a point between Sanders and Clinton. This is amazing stuff. We'll go there shortly to Jane Patterson. We're also going to go in a couple of minutes to our economics correspondent, Patrick O'Mara. He's been at an official briefing about what's going to happen with the signing of the TPP at Sky City in Auckland. He's going to pop out of there and update us on what's going on. But in terms of what's going on, Mihi Narangi Forbes, there's lots to discuss about what's happening in the Māori world. One, what's going to happen at Te and Waitangi on the 5th and 6th, whether John Key is welcome, whether he understands he's welcome, whether there's any consensus up there at all, and also what's going to happen at the Pōwhiri, or non-Pōwhiri, at the signing on Thursday. Let's start in the north. What's happening at Te?
Well, as we know today, there was a hui was called to discuss, a couple of weeks ago, we heard Kingi Taurua had said the Prime Minister and his group weren't welcome at Te and he would lock the gates if he went ahead and signed the TPP on Thursday. Since then, there were people like David Samuels came out and told RNZ that it was good to have the Prime Minister, the government at Te because that's the right place to have a discussion, a debate about things that, you think that the government hasn't upheld the principles of Waitangi. We'll say it on the marae and they get to respond. So they held a hui today and I think it was optimistic to think that a hui in 4 hours was going to solve everything. There was 60 to 70 people there. A vote took place, I think 38 to 14 is what I'm told.
38 to 14?
Against inviting the Prime Minister. But, these were...
So that's almost 3 to 1.
That's right. And these were people from all over Ngāpuhi. And at the end of the day, the marae is a whānau marae, a hapu marae, and it's governed by a trust. And those trustees have turned around and decided that they will... under tikanga, they've told me, will invite him because it's the right thing to do. Everyone's welcome on their marae. And Te Whai Harawira, who's escorted, for 10 years, Prime Ministers onto the marae, has rung his office and she has told him she'll escort him and he'll be fine with her.
So 38-14 against, but Te Whai Harawira says, hold on a sec, this is a whānau marae and I'm taking him on. What happens now? And what does John Key think is happening?
So I think from reading reports, I haven't heard back from the Prime Minister's office, because we've been in here, but as I know it, he's probably a little bit confused, as he may well be. The understanding is that there will be a further meeting this evening with the trustees of that marae to get some kind of consensus, and then I guess either the tono or the invitation will go to him, or they'll reaffirm, yes, of course you're invited, come on down, and I guess that the Prime Minister's people will make a decision based on that.
And he's still saying he won't go on unless he gets a formal invitation and is welcome to speak at Te
Yeah,
Te.
there's some confusion as to whether he will be allowed to speak, but I mean, I'm not sure where that's coming from. And in a pōwhiri situation, no one's told not to speak. That's your ability. It's a debate, and it's the marae, and you stand and speak if you want to speak. So I'm not sure if that is officially they're saying you can't speak there, or that's just been caught up in the confusion.
So it's your expectation we'll get clarity out of the North at some stage tonight or tomorrow morning?
Yeah, I think tonight they'll have a hui and they'll work it out, and Kingi Taurua and Rihari Dargaville and Te Whai Harawera will get together with a smaller group who are the trustees of that marae and the other trustees and make a decision.
Okay, fascinating. Let's talk about the pōwhiri, because really, in normal circumstances, if we look at royal visits, if we look at APEC, if we look at, actually, as you were pointing out to me before, the Georgian rugby team.
The Georgian rugby team.
And my favourite was Disney on Ice. Mickey Mouse received the pōwhiri when the Disney show came to town. In normal circumstances, something like the TPP signing would get a huge pōwhiri, wouldn't it?
Well, that's what we do in Aotearoa, if you are officially being invited or welcomed into this country, you usually get a full pōwhiri. And a full pōwhiri is, the wero, they go out and put the take down on the ground, and then there's the haka pōwhiri and the karanga happens. And it's a big deal, and we've seen it so many times.
And it's stirring, and it's moving, and it's wonderful, and also it's large. Typically, at a very big event, what sort of size would we see?
Well, just looking at some of the footage today from the Georgian rugby team, from Mickey Mouse, and others like Venus Williams and Michael Jackson. I mean, if it's on a marae, you get more because there's people just there that will join in or come and listen, But if it's somewhere like the casino or the town hall or something, a good number is 50.
Okay.
40 to 50.
And how many are going to perform what is not now a pōwhiri at the signing of the TPP at Sky City on Thursday?
We're told 3 or 4. By Tami Te Rangi, who represents Te Runanga o Ngāti Whātua.
3 or 4?
3 or 4 will, it'll be small and it'll be simple, and there'll be a karanga and he will do the mihi. And he wanted to make a point that he wouldn't be representing the government, he would be only representing Ngāti Whātua, which in itself is questionable, because you've got Ōrākei and Kaipara saying that they won't perform in it. Look, we're in Auckland's biggest city, and if the government can't get more than 3 or 4 people to perform a pōwhiri, they're in trouble on this
Mihi
one.
Ngārangi Forbes, thanks so much. Our Māori issues correspondent, Mihi Ngārangi Forbes, thanks Mihi. Let's go now to our economics correspondent, Patrick O'Mara, who's been at the official briefing about what's going to happen with the signing at Sky City on Thursday. He joins us by live view from outside the venue. Patrick, what can you tell us?
Well, John, I guess at one level there it's going to be very disappointing, I think, for these trade ministers or their equivalents who are going to be turning up, and they are not going to get that, what is one of the world's great cultural experiences by the sound of it. And unfortunately, that just highlights what we've heard from Māori, and they're concerned about the TPP agreement. But look, today's official or unofficial announcement that we had from MFAT, the briefing that we had, wasn't about the bad news. This was all about the good news. This was about TPP. This is a big deal. How much this is going to bring to the country. The $2.7 billion number got trotted out once again. A market of 800 million, which gives great opportunities for New Zealand's exporters. Little less about the concerns around national sovereignty and all that out there. So at one level, it was a great deal. At another level, we didn't get a lot that I can actually share with you about what's going to happen on the Thursday.
Patrick, can I just cut in here? Have you just been subjected to a sales pitch from MFAT?
Well, yes, John, I have. And possibly quite so. After all, they were the negotiators for this deal on behalf of the government. The government needs to desperately get out here and now sell this deal. The signing, of course, is just the beginning of a domestic process which will get underway to try and pass this deal. But they're going to have to get out there and tell us more about why this is such a good deal, because there seems to be a reasonable amount of opposition out there who don't necessarily believe it.
Okay, Patrick, what can you tell us about what's going to happen on Thursday? What is allowed out from under the cone of silence?
Well, we do know, John, that all these trade ministers are going to be here on that Thursday, and early on Thursday morning. When they're arriving, we weren't told, but you'd assume that they are going to start trickling in, if not from tonight, then definitely tomorrow, because it looks like it's going to be an early start on Thursday for them. Look, should be done and dusted by tea time, but after that, they're not giving any details about when the signing is as such. Look, we will get a chance to meet or see the ministers. There will be, if it follows what we've seen with other TPP arrangements, there will be a briefing afterwards. We'll get to ask some questions of the ministers as well. But really, as I said, this is just largely ceremonial, this deal today. But as you can see from behind me, John, I mean, there is barricades out, and as we know, there are going to be people here who will express this displeasure about this deal as well. So while ministers will be tucked up in the convention centre, but behind me there will be people out here who will be trying to make their presence felt.
Patrick O'Mara, our economics correspondent, who will be covering the signing for us on the day. Thank you so much, Patrick. Patrick, live from the venue. One of the most contentious and contended elements of the TPP is the ISDS, the Investor State Dispute Settlement. In short, this grants an investor, a corporation for example, a mechanism to use dispute settlement proceedings against a foreign government. It's a court of sorts, but conferred by the powers of the TPP and outside a country's court system. The question is, how binding is an ISDS decision? Does the TPP compel governments or corporations to act on what an ISDS rules? And if a government or a corporation rejects an ISDS decision, how do they appeal it? Can they appeal it? Now, I asked Trade Minister Todd McClay these questions last night. If you missed it, here's about a minute of his reply.
Extremely comfortable with where it's landed.
What say goes wrong? Is there an appeal process allowed for under this?
There are significant numbers of safeguards that have been built in.
Minister, is there an appeal process allowed for under this?
Ultimately,
is there the right of appeal, and is there someone to appeal to?
So ultimately, the final appeal that could take place if a government and any one of the TPP countries didn't agree with an outcome is that within the agreement, the sovereign right to withdraw from that agreement or to make changes. So, John, the very important thing to focus on here is not whether or not ultimately a court or something else can make a decision. It's the likelihood of that happening, and whether or not in the case that it's justified, we have the ability to defend it. With the exclusions that have been put in place, the tobacco can't take a case, that we have the right to make any decision.
That exclusion is going to remain. That exclusion, you're absolutely certain that exclusion is going to remain? You give us your word on the radio now that tobacco exclusion is going to remain?
I will be signing the agreement on Thursday, and therefore, as part of the legislation we put through, that was the commitment as far as New Zealand's concerned.
That's Todd McClay from yesterday. So the question remains, are there formal appeal provisions that go over and above the ISDS forum? We asked Mr McClay's office to cite the provisions in the TPP deal. We haven't heard back from them, so we went to an expert in American public law. Alan Morrison is a professor of public law at George Washington University. He's previously taught at both Harvard and Stanford, but perhaps more importantly, he's also argued 20 cases before the US Supreme Court, specialising in public law. Now, in an article for The Atlantic magazine, he argues, and I quote, TPP arbitrators will decide what is essentially a legal question, whether government actions which are designed to protect our health, safety, environment and economic well-being are consistent with the TPP. And if governments don't like the answer, I asked him if the TPP does contain a formal appeal procedure.
There is no right of appeal from arbitrations as we know the right of appeal. Indeed, the ISDS makes it pretty clear that there are no appeal rights. It is conceivable that in an action to enforce an arbitration, there are some limited review, but I can't imagine the United States government forcing a company that's won an arbitration against it to go sue them the government would just pay it. So I think as a practical matter, there is nothing in the ISDS or anything placed in the TPP to provide for an appeal. And so I guess the answer is no. There is no appeal.
So there is nothing in the TPP agreement that provides for an appeal after an ISDS ruling?
That's correct. I assume by appeal you mean a situation in which a group of judges, whether they're international judges or New Zealand judges or American judges, can review the decision as they would review a decision of any other tribunal, meaning they look at the facts and review them at least to see that they're properly found, and they review the questions of law, including the constitutional questions. And there is no such provision for that. Indeed, the whole point of this is to keep these cases out of the domestic courts of New Zealand, the United States, and all the rest of the signatories.
If we look at your article in The Atlantic, and the question the article begins with, the headline in fact, is the Trans-Pacific Partnership unconstitutional? What's the answer to that question?
Well, as you probably know, writers have very little control over people who write the headlines.
Yes, I do know that.
I'm sure you have some of the same painful experiences I have. This is not so bad, but I have never contended that the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement as a whole is unconstitutional. What I argued is that the dispute settlement, the ISDS, is unconstitutional because it's being done by private persons. There's no right of appeal to the courts. The private persons are also individuals who represent investors in various other contexts. And overall, it just doesn't fit with our system under which neutral judges are supposed to decide important questions, including those arising under treaties and laws of the United States. And I think it's unconstitutional in that regard, and have so said on a number of occasions.
Alan Morrison, public law expert now based at the Law School at George Washington University. Now, as we discussed last night, the European Union is also in negotiations to have a form of, well, a similar kind of trade deal with the US, not trans-Pacific, but transatlantic. But the TTIP will almost certainly not contain the ISDS dispute settlement mechanism. It's been rejected entirely by European negotiators. Here in 30 seconds is Anna Fielder, Senior Policy Advisor of the Transatlantic Consumer Dialogue, explaining why.
We do not like investor-state dispute resolution mechanism. We want it completely out of the agreement. We don't see why in advanced democratic economies with advanced judicial systems you need a private court to arbitrate on government rights to regulate. So for us, ISDS is out.
That's Anna Fielder, 25 minutes past 5 on Checkpoint. We're going to have more on the TPP later, but coming up next, why one of the flags on Auckland's Harbour Bridge is about to come down, and we are in Iowa, where extraordinary things have happened. Cruz has beaten Trump, and Clinton and Sanders so close. We'd love your feedback in any way you choose. Please contact us via Twitter, Facebook, email, text. We really do enjoy hearing from you. Now, let's turn to the much criticised potential new flag flying on Auckland's Harbour Bridge. Less than 2 weeks after it was hoisted high above the city's landmark bridge, Checkpoint can tonight reveal it's coming down. Many Aucklanders have complained that the Carl Lockwood flag is wrong because it appears to be a lighter blue than the correct darker shade. But the chair of the flag consideration panel, John Burrows, claims it's more complicated than that.
Well, as I understand it, making a very large flag for a public place is quite a complex matter, because the Harbour Bridge is there in all sorts of weather, all sorts of light conditions, and of course it's got to be safe. But the correct colour was supplied, and the correct colour has been used on the flag. I understand it's called Pantane 286C, so the correct colour was used. But when it gets up there, up high, in the light, with a particular sort of fabric, it looks wrong. And it's acknowledged it doesn't look quite correct.
Okay, lots of people have been saying this isn't the colour they thought it was. At what stage did someone come to you or the panel and just say, hey, this isn't the flag?
We heard it last week for the first time, and that was via the Herald, the New Zealand Herald. Whether anybody's approach is direct, I'm not sure. But certainly I do understand people have said it's not the right colour, and up there it doesn't look it. But in fact it is the right colour. It just, in those conditions, it doesn't look quite right, and we suspect it's the type of fabric as much as anything else. But what's happening now is it is going to come down, and they're going to have a look at it, and they are going to try and correct it.
Okay, so will they have to replace it with another flag made of different fabric that satisfies all the criteria you began by talking about?
I think that is likely to be what happens, and that, of course, will take several days because you can't make these things overnight. So it is likely that a new one will go up sometime next week, and the exact day I can't tell you.
Okay, so this is a bit of a shambles in the context of the approaching referendum, isn't it?
Oh, I wouldn't say it's a shambles. It's just one of those things that happens, and apparently it is a fact that many flags can look different in different conditions. It's just one of those things that's happened.
The other flag up there, the existing flag, is that made of the same material?
No, that I couldn't tell you because that's been up a very long time, that particular one. But we've sent out double flags all over the country, both the new one and the current one, and there's been no trouble with them. They're smaller flags, but they're all perfectly hunky-dory.
Okay, so just to clarify,
any trouble with.
The flag on the Auckland Harbour Bridge is now the wrong colour, even though it was the right colour, and it is coming down to be replaced.
It's the right colour, but it looks wrong in certain conditions up there, so it is coming down, and they are going to do something about it, because it's obviously very important that it looks right.
Professor John Burrows is just confirming that the flag is coming down from the Auckland Harbour Bridge. That is the Challenger flag. Incredible things happening in Iowa. US Senator Ted Cruz has beaten billionaire Donald Trump in the Republican presidential nomination contest. That's a big upset. Also extraordinary things happening very close in the Democratic race. Shortly we'll talk to our political editor Jane Patterson, who's there. But first, Deborah Lutterbuck from Reuters spoke to Iowans in West Des Moines ahead of the caucus.
I do feel it's important to caucus. It just shows the world and America that Iowa does deserve to be first in the nation, because we're very engaged and very involved with all the politicians that show up here, and we want to hear what they have to say and kind of help vet them out and weed out the who we think is important and who we think is not important.
Iowa is the first state in the nation to weigh in on the presidential race, a role locals take very seriously.
Oh, this is what our soldiers fight for. We fight for freedom to give us the right to vote. I mean, I'm even giving up my girls' basketball game to go to caucus, so.
And it's a lesson hammered home to Iowans almost as part of their birthright.
And my parents are just kind of have always instilled in me just the kind of want or need to exercise my own freedom in voting. So I'm excited to do that.
Well, let's go live now to Jane Patterson, RNZ's political editor, who is at what was meant to be Donald Trump's victory party at the Sheraton Hotel, West Des Moines. Jane, what is the atmosphere like there?
Well, there was a party for Donald Trump in the hotel behind me. It was pretty short and sweet, only lasting probably about 20 minutes. His supporters, though, relatively upbeat, saying this is only the first caucus and there are plenty more states to come. And I do have a couple of Trump supporters here with me who are keen to talk to Radio New Zealand, so I'll just introduce them. What's your name, sir?
Tom Hovest. Mike Vinicutter.
Neil Warnicki.
Okay, so what do you make of what happened tonight?
A historical event.
In a good or a bad way?
We're changing America in a good way.
Do you think this is it for Trump, or he can go on and win some other states?
We started rolling the tide. We're going to roll on.
Okay, what about you, Mike?
We don't like to lose. We usually come out on top for number one, but second place is first loser, so we're going to go on. We're going to keep rolling. We're going to make America great again.
Oh, good. And our other friend is just laughing in the background, so I'll just come back to me.
Jane, that's very optimistic of them. But Trump has had so much publicity, so much attention, so much of the momentum in terms of the coverage and a sense of impetus. If he can't win Iowa after all the attention, after all the words, where does this leave him?
Well, he's off to New Hampshire, and if the polls are anything to go by, he's got a much greater lead in New Hampshire, and that's what he's talking up tonight, saying, well, Iowa was always going to be a tough call, especially against Ted Cruz and that large Christian heartland in Iowa. So Mr. Trump really talking up his fortunes in New Hampshire and saying this is just the first one in a long line of states and it's by no means over.
Jane, just before you go, incredibly close in the Democratic race, Clinton by less than a point over Sanders. Was anyone picking it would be that tight? Has this taken people by surprise?
No, I don't think it has. I think in the last couple of days there's been a real realisation, especially from Hillary Clinton's camp, that Bernie Sanders was going to give her a real run for her money. And in fact, I attended one of the Democrat caucuses today, and that was a fascinating event, and it was very obvious that the crowd was pretty much split half and half. In fact, the caucus that I went to, Bernie Sanders won by just one vote. It was 43 people to 44, and there are about 8 Martin O'Malley candidates in the room, and he, of course, has suspended his campaign. And once the viability was lost with Martin O'Malley, that is, you had to get 15% of the people in the room, then the Clinton and the Sanders camps had to persuade them and the undecided voters to come over to their camps. So if that caucus was anything to go by, which is being reflected in the results around the rest of the state, incredibly close between Clinton and Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. Thanks so much, Jane. Jane, from what was meant to be, Jane Patterson, RNZ's political editor, from what was meant to be the Donald Trump victory party. Trump saying that that he's philosophical about Iowa. He thought he was going to win that. Absolutely no doubt about it. If you look at his rhetoric over the past 2 weeks, and had he won it, that place would have been going off where Jane was. 5:33 on Checkpoint. Coming up, it's brown, smelly and turning the washing a really unpleasant colour. Why residents of the far north town of Kaiwo are being told to boil their water. We speak to Compass about their Meals on Wheels following their meeting with the Southern DHB today, and the curious employment case of a woman whose job was given to someone else while she received cancer treatment. So why does she have to pay $3,000 to her former company? Nona's standing by to talk about the Fletcher purchase of Higgins. But first, here's Katrina Batten with the headlines.
There's confusion over the Prime Minister's invitation to attend Waitangi commemorations at Te Ti Marae. A Ngāpuhi Kuia Te Te Whai Harawira has invited the Prime Minister to attend Waitangi commemorations at the marae. John Key says he won't go to Waitangi if he's not allowed to speak on Te Ti Marae. Mr Key says marae trustees are meeting tonight to agree on their position. A Māori welcome will be extended to guests at the signing of the Trans-Pacific Partnership in Auckland, but it will be small and simple. Just 3 or 4 people will perform the welcome, and spokesperson Tame Te Rangi says it's a whakatau, not a pōwhiri. That means there'll be no wero or challenge. Auckland council workers are being told to avoid the city centre if they can during demonstrations against the TPP. Several protests and hikoi are expected to march up Queen Street and end at Sky City, where the agreement is expected to be signed. The Auckland Council has advised staff that if they can work somewhere other than at their headquarters near Sky City, then they should. Senator Ted Cruz has beaten billionaire Donald Trump and Senator Marco Rubio in Iowa's Republican caucuses. Among Democrats, Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders are deadlocked in a tight race. An administrator whose job was given to someone else when she took leave for cancer treatment has lost her case for unfair dismissal. Corinne Tribe must instead pay her former company $3,000 after an email she sent telling her boss about the treatment was ruled to be a form of resignation. And tourists travelling to Northland are being advised by locals not to drink the water in the small town of Kyle. Helen Owens from Kyle Farm and Fuel says the water, which is supplied by a private company, is brown and has an odd smell. I'll have more news, sport and weather at 6.
Thanks, Katrina. Let's turn to business now with Nona, who is sitting beside me in the studio. Nona Peltier, our senior business reporter in Auckland. New Zealand's biggest construction company, Fletcher Building, buying roading and maintenance firm Higgins Group for $315 million.
Yes, big news.
Big news.
Big news, and actually it's the biggest news we've had on the corporate front this year so far.
Right.
Yeah.
Why is Fletcher's doing this?
Well, it's interesting. They have been divesting of companies and businesses for the last 2 or 3 years. But all the time in the background, they've been courting the Higgins family, who have the third largest road and maintenance.
This is a private company. Higgins is
Yes,
Manawatu family, right?
Yeah. And the Fletcher Building has had a very nice relationship with them over those years. 40 years they've been doing business together, and they had the eye on that business. At first, the Higgins family were reluctant, but eventually they came to a deal, and last night they finalized it.
How is Fletcher's going to pay for it, $350 million?
Well, they're going to fund it through the money they've raised through the divestment of funds, mostly that things that they've sold in Australia. Most recently, they've sold quite a few of their assets there, underperforming assets.
Some of them were quite short-term holds too, weren't they?
Yeah, and some of them are just simply not non-core. So Fletcher has taken a good look at their business and restructured it. Mark Adamson has also restructured the business today. Announced a restructure. He's changed it into 5 divisions, and he's hired a fella who's going to help him keep the business on track with the strategic development that he's put on course. And he's now going to, what he says, get back on the saddle and look around for some more assets. He's not saying which ones, but he says there are definitely some holes there in their business and some assets they'd like to acquire. Not at any price, but he wouldn't tip his hand onto what kind of assets those might be.
How did the market react to this?
They loved it.
Did they in terms of Fletcher stock?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The share price rose just over 2.5%, 19 cents, up to $7.19 today, which was fairly good, and that absolutely helped the market rise as well, because it's been a real volatile time. I mean, January was a really rough period for the markets.
Yeah, well, all that uncertainty that we previously discussed.
And we still have that uncertainty, but at least now we're getting some corporate reporting, corporate news coming through, and that's giving the market something to put their teeth into.
Yeah, a sense of direction thanks to Fletcher's.
Yeah, it's a big deal, and so we'll have a bit more of that on our program tomorrow. And of course, tomorrow we also have the labour market statistics coming out, and we're going to have a speech that's in the morning, and in the afternoon we've got Graham Wheeler, Governor Wheeler's speech.
This is an important speech, but it's just because this is agenda setting, really,
Yeah.
and this is quite declaratory. I mean, Wheeler's telling us where he's going this year, but as Giles told us last week, media aren't allowed to attend it. Does that still stand, or is
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. The Reserve Bank of Australia announced their position today, just about an hour ago, and really it was in line with what the market was expecting. So nothing much happened.
Give us the numbers.
Yes,
Nana.
so the NZX Top 50 Index wasn't very much changed, but it did better than some of the other markets in Asia that are a little bit feeling that volatility and uncertainty. So up just by 6 points to 6,180. Volume was reasonable, and the dollar is trading at 65.2 US cents, 92 cents Australian.
Thank you, Nona, as always. Nona Peltier, who is a senior business reporter here in Auckland. Let's head north of Auckland to the small town of Kyle, where there's something in the water. Actually, not for the first time. Dissatisfied residents say the water there smells strange, is brown and makes your washing filthy. It's got to the point now where locals are warning off tourists who tries to use the public taps, and health authorities are telling people to boil the water before drinking it. Yes, that's right. In Kyle, you are being told to boil your water. Lois Williams has been looking at this, and when sweating backpackers arrive in Kyle, they make a beeline for the public taps around the town to fill their water bottles. Helen Owens from the Kyle Farm and Fuel says when she and her husband bought the garage 10 years ago, sorry, I've just stolen Lois's script. We do actually have Lois's story, and so I'm going to stop talking and Lois is going to take over.
When sweating backpackers arrive in Kyle, they make a beeline for public taps, like the one at Kyle Farm and Fuel, to fill their water bottles. Helen Owen says when she and her husband bought the garage 10 years ago, they planned to put in a drinking fountain for customers. They even plumbed in the pipes. But when they saw what was coming out of them, they scrapped the idea.
It smells a bit, and it certainly tastes funny. Tourists that come into town, especially cyclists and backpackers that want to fill water bottles from any of the outside taps, we advise them not to because of the colour and the smell and the unknown quality of it.
Some Kyle homes are now on tank supply, using only rainwater collected from roofs, but many are not. The town's reticulated water supply comes from a bore which used to be run by the Far North District Council. But the council washed its hands of that job several years ago. The private company that took over failed, and it's now been handed over to a local trust called Y-Care Consultants. But they've got some dissatisfied customers. Anna Valentine, who owns a house on Kaios Main Street, says she's had nothing but trouble with the water and Y-Care since she moved in. She says the trust first tried to charge her $2,000 for a hookup fee, but she refused because the water was full of sludge and essentially undrinkable.
And we're supposed to pay for this water that we're getting through the tap, but we buy drinking water and I boil all the water as before I use it, but we don't drink that water because I'm too scared about my family's health, really.
Ms Valentine says she hates bathing her children in brown water, and she hates seeing her washing emerge from the machine in two tones, brown and browner. She says council staff who meet at the library next door won't drink it and insisted on a roof tank for their cups of tea. But she can't afford to install a roof tank, and all she can do is complain to Y-Care, which has stopped returning her calls. A spokesperson for Y-Care, Bryce Smith, did return our calls. He says the water's fine when it leaves the treatment plant, and in Ms Valentine's case he claims old plumbing is partly to blame for silting up her tank. He says Northland Health also bears some responsibility.
We don't know nothing about a water plant. That's what you need to understand. The new plant that was installed was a recommendation from the ministry themselves. And here's something for nothing. That company went bankrupt before the completion of the installation.
Northland Health says it hopes to have a solution soon, but in the meantime it's slapped a boil water notice on the town due to what it calls failing processes in the treatment plant. For Checkpoint, Lois Williams.
Thanks, Lois. Former New Zealand Prime Minister Helen Clark is at the heart of a new Australian political scrap. Ms Clark is expected to run for the position of UN Secretary-General later this year, and Liberal MP Tony Abbott pledged the Australians' government's support to her campaign while he was Prime Minister. He was quite unequivocal about that. But the country's Foreign Minister, Julie Bishop, is adamant she was not aware of the agreement and has signalled the current government would consider supporting another former Australian Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd, if he was nominated for the job. Confused? Well, Paul Kelly is the editor-at-large for the Australian newspaper, and he's been following this growing, conflict shambles?
Frankly, I think this is an embarrassment for Australia because we seem to have an extraordinary conflict between the former Prime Minister Tony Abbott and the Foreign Minister Julie Bishop about what was the position of the Abbott government in terms of Australian support for a new UN Secretary-General to replace Ban Ki-moon. And of course, two of the candidates were the former New Zealand Prime Minister Helen Clark and the former Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd.
What's not in dispute is that Tony Abbott gave New Zealand a guarantee of Australian support, right? No one's denying Abbott did that.
That's correct. I've got hold of the correspondence between Tony Abbott and the New Zealand Prime Minister John Key in late 2014. Essentially, New Zealand wanted to campaign naturally for Helen Clark to get the job. John Key wanted Tony Abbott's support, wanted Australia to support Helen Clark. Abbott agreed to this, and this was formalised in an exchange of correspondence in which Abbott made it absolutely crystal clear to John Key that as Prime Minister, he, Tony Abbott, would commit to a joint campaigning strategy to support Helen Clark for the job. There's no doubt about any of that. But the problem arises in terms of Australian politics. Julie Bishop has said that as Foreign Minister, dealing with the UN on a regular basis, she was not aware of the commitment that Tony Abbott had made. She was not aware of the exchange of letters, and she was not aware of that commitment.
Is that credible?
Well, both Tony Abbott and Julie Bishop have made very strong statements. I spoke to Julie Bishop late last night. she said to me on the record, so there's no ambiguity about this, she said to me on the record she was not aware of the commitment that Tony Abbott had made to Helen Clark, that she was not aware of the letter he'd sent to John Key, that her office wasn't aware of it and her department wasn't aware of it. And Bishop has also made it clear that as Foreign Minister, when Malcolm Turnbull became Prime Minister, she advised Malcolm Turnbull that the position of the Australian government was that we were not committed to any candidate, and that if an Australian became a candidate, i.e. if Kevin Rudd became a candidate, then the Turnbull cabinet could consider that situation and would have its options open in terms of supporting him. So there's no doubt that that's what Julie Bishop believed to be the situation. Essentially, we've got a deadlock here in terms of Australian domestic politics between Tony Abbott and Julie Bishop about what the Australian position actually was.
The Australian's editor-at-large, Paul Kelly, 12 and a half minutes to 6. This afternoon, representatives from the Compass Group have met with staff from the Southern DHB to discuss concerns about the quality of the food it's providing to Meals on Wheels clients in Dunedin and Invercargill. Since the Southern DHB outsourced its kitchen services, Compass has been producing the meals in the North Island, delivering them by truck frozen to the South Island. Invercargill hospital patients receive the meals as to 250 Meals on Wheels customers in Dunedin and Invercargill. From next week, Dunedin hospital patients will also receive the meals. Last night we spoke to Meals on Wheels volunteer Liz Green, who delivers the meals. Liz claims since Compass took over on January 18, the meals have simply not been up to scratch.
The meal that I have seen was meant to be a sausage casserole, which was served with mashed potato and some other vegetables, but it was very watery, it was very wet. We end up with a spare meal every time, just in case somebody has a visitor and needs a second meal, or in case of something happening and one of the meals being compromised in its seal or just not being suitable to leave. And I brought that meal home on Thursday and had a good look and actually tasted what was being taken out, because we had so many comments that the meals were not fit for consumption. And it was incredibly salty, it was full of water. The sausages in the casserole were, well, I wouldn't give them to the dog.
It's Liz Green, a Meals on Wheels volunteer. What does the Southern DHB say about this? Well, we invited Chief Executive Carol Heatley onto the program. She was unavailable, but she did tell us the number of Meals on Wheels clients who've cancelled their meals has increased from 11 to 44. Compass's National Development and Innovation Manager is Lauren Scott. A short time ago, she told me what's happened there today.
What's happening, John, is that we are in the process of introducing a new Meals on Wheels menu and meals, and we've had some feedback from some of our recipients in the Dunedin area.
Okay, so you've taken the feedback on board and you are doing what?
Well, we met with the DHB today. We see the feedback that we've received today as being really important. We have received some positive and some negative feedback. So we really want to get, I guess, a wider view on what our community groups are saying about the new meals. We've agreed with the DHB that we will go ahead and do some additional food tastings and engaging with those community groups that are receiving the meals, just to make sure that we've got a full picture of what they're saying.
Okay, we spoke to a Meals on Wheels volunteer last night who said the food wasn't fit to feed to her dog. Another woman was quoted in the ODT saying it was disgusting or revolting. I can't remember the exact description. Do you think that's a fair description of the kind of food that Compass is sending down to these people in Dunedin?
I think the meals are very similar to what has been provided in the past before the change. I think it does take a period of time for people to adjust to the new meals, and we're encouraging people to try the different meals and to also provide feedback directly to us. If we do see that there is some genuine concern, we will obviously look to change out some of those unpopular menu items for things that are more popular, and we can do that really quickly if we need to.
Lauren, can I clarify how the food is prepared? Is it prepared in Auckland or Tauranga and then sent frozen to Dunedin where it is reheated? Is that what is going on?
So the meals are prepared by our specialist supplier in Auckland and also in Tauranga. Those meals are prepared using fresh ingredients that we get from New Zealand. They are snap frozen using the latest technology that we have available to us. So they retain all the nutrition that we can as part of that technology. They are then sent down to Dunedin where they're reheated in the hospital kitchen and they're sent out to recipients hot.
Okay, hot and wet and not very appetising, according to the reports we've had.
So one of the things that we have undertaken to do over the next couple of days is actually have our service manager attend some of those Meals on Wheels runs and look at the meals as they're received by the recipients. We've done a number of tastings with community groups and also DHB stakeholders at the point at which we release the meals, and the quality of those meals hasn't raised any concerns to date.
Lauren Scott from Compass, who make the meals. 6:08. An animal protection group says money raised by an American trophy hunting club auctioning off New Zealand hunts will be used to kill endangered and vulnerable species. Safari Club International is holding its annual Ultimate Hunters Market in Las Vegas this week. Laura Bootham reports.
Safari Club International boasts a membership of 55,000, including the American dentist Walter Palmer, who received worldwide criticism after killing Cecil the lion, a popular Zimbabwe tourist attraction. The trophy hunts being auctioned at the club's black tie gala dinners in Las Vegas this week include many New Zealand trips, like a 5-day red deer and tahr hunt worth more than $90,000. The auction has drawn condemnation from Humane Society International. Its international trade policy specialist, Marsha Kalinina, says the club supports the killing of endangered animals like African lions and leopards.
Many of these hunts, actually 28, will be conducted in New Zealand. And the funds raised by the killing of New Zealand non-native species will go to fund raised for squirrel hunting, anti-conservation activities by Safari Club International.
Marsha Kalinina says the proceeds from the auction starting Thursday will also be used to lobby governments to give hunters better access to endangered and vulnerable wildlife.
Last year, SCI raised $14.7 million of its $23 million annual revenue from the convention itself. And a large chunk of that comes from the auction of the species.
The SPCA is backing the Society's stance. Its chief executive, Rick Odom, says hunting is justified to control pests or to put food on the table if it's done in a humane way, but this is different.
This whole issue of trophy hunting cuts across that. It's not there to control animals. It's there simply to provide entertainment for people who see hunting as a sport.
And he says some of the hunters lack skills.
You can never know what kind of people are engaged in trophy hunting, and by that I mean we don't know how proficient they are or what means they use to kill the animals. So it could well be that you're getting somebody who may not be all that proficient, who are shooting animals with a firearm or a bow in some cases, and they may not be that good a shot. The risk you run there is that the animal ends up suffering unnecessarily for no other reason than for the entertainment of the hunter.
However, the Deer Stalkers Association president, Bill O'Leary, says the reaction to the auction is a storm in a teacup and people need to fully understand the issue.
The animal may be, or that species may be endangered in a particular country, but in the areas where they are being hunted legally, the animal numbers are such that there is a surplus of animals, and the government of that country has decided that the animals can be harvested and that the money will be put to a good use.
Bill O'Leary says he can't rule out that some of the money raised at the auction might be used to hunt endangered and vulnerable species, but the majority is used for conservation. The Professional Hunters Guides Association has not responded to RNZ's request for comment. For Checkpoint, Laura Bootham.
Employment issues now. A woman whose job was given to someone else while she received cancer treatment has lost her case for unfair dismissal and must pay $3,000 to her former company. When Auckland Administrator Corinne Tribe found out she'd mouth cancer, she sent an email to her employer at JSC Timber saying she hoped to stay but would understand if she was replaced. And the company did replace her despite Ms Tribe refusing to formally resign. She took her case to the Employment Relations Authority, which has just published their decision. Our employment reporter Max Toll. Max, it seems to hinge on this email, does it? What did it say?
Yeah, John, a little bit earlier you described this as a curious case. I think it's also quite a sobering one. But I'll take you back a step first. In September 2014, Corinne Tribe was given what I'm sure was quite devastating news. She was told she had mouth cancer, or more specifically, cancer of the tongue. She was also told by her doctor that it would need to be surgically removed and reconstructed. Naturally, 2 days later, she emailed her employer, and I'll just read you out a section of the email as it is important to the story. These are the words of Corinne Tribe. Whilst I would dearly love to hope that the job would be there for me, I appreciate that a business cannot be run like that and that you probably need to move on, cut your losses and employ someone new. I am concerned that my ability to speak clearly, whilst not hindering the job itself, may make it difficult for a new employer to take a chance on me. So if it was at all possible for me to keep in touch with the hope of anything that may come up at JSC, I would be grateful. Now, those words were interpreted by the company as effectively a resignation.
Yeah.
So 2 days later, it asked her to formally resign or to put it in writing. At that point, she said, hold on, I haven't done anything along those lines. I haven't chosen to resign. Nevertheless, a couple of weeks later, the company hired someone new to fill her role, which is why she took her case to the ERA for unfair dismissal.
And what did the authorities say, Max?
Well, unfortunately for Mrs. Tribe, it ruled that her email and what I just read out was indeed effectively a resignation. It also said that the company's reaction was a reasonable one. It considered her justification for the email was that it was written a couple of days after she was diagnosed. She was under particular stress. It was a difficult time for her. And in her words, she didn't know which way was up. Nevertheless, it said 2 days was enough time to come to a well-thought-out decision, and it disregarded that evidence. And to add insult to injury, the authority, as you said, also ordered her to pay the company's $3,000 legal bill.
You've spoken to the CTU about this. What's their take on it, Max?
Yeah, I always like to get a third opinion for stories like this, so I sent the decision to the CTU's lawyer, Jeff Sissons. He had a look over it, and he raised 2 points. One, that it's always important for employers to show workers kindness, respect and understanding at particularly stressful times like these, and not to rush into any decisions. The second point he made was that companies, wherever possible, should try to accommodate workers and allow them to keep their jobs.
Max Toll, our employment reporter. Thank you so much, Max. We really appreciate it. Lots and lots of feedback coming in. If you want to contact us, you can email us, checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. You can text 2101. Our Facebook and Twitter addresses are checkpoint at Radio NZ. I don't know how I can keep forgetting that. Okay, and so let's give you a sample. It's tragic. Checkpoint RNZ, at Checkpoint RNZ. The modern world. Katrina Batten is sitting beside me, smiling kindly. Let's give you a sample of some of the feedback that we are receiving. Lots of stuff on the new flag. We have revealed tonight that it's coming down off the Harbour Bridge because the colour on it is awry. When I say the new flag, obviously that's the Challenger flag in the referendum. In fact, it's polling behind the old flag at the moment. Susan said, oh, that's hilarious. We've disliked the new flag option from the get-go. But a few days ago, my husband came home and said he'd seen it flying on the Harbour Bridge and he actually quite liked it because of the lovely azure blue colour. You can't win. Yeah, that's a faded colour, Susan. Andreen says should always double hit the blue for flags in positions like that. Blue washes out when the light shines through it. That appears to be what happens. Lots of comments on Todd McLay and his inability to say last night whether or not you can appeal ISDS decisions in the TPP. The answer is quite simply you can't. It's 6 o'clock. Kia ora everyone, you are with Checkpoint and John Campbell on RNZ National on the radio, as always, screening live on Freeview for Channel 50, streaming live on the RNZ website. Thank you for joining us. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, why WorkSafe believes prosecutions aren't the way to improve safety in the agricultural sector. Last night we heard from the Minister selling the TPP. MFAT have been doing the same this afternoon. Patrick O'Mara, our economics correspondent, was there, but there are strong opponents, and perhaps foremost among them is Jane Kelsey. She joins us live in the studio shortly. But first, here's the news with Katrina Batten.
Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Te Ti Marae says there should be no confusion over an invitation to the Prime Minister to attend its Waitangi commemorations. The Ngāpui Kuia Te Te Whai Harawira extended an invitation to John Key's office today after a lengthy debate at the marae about whether he should come. Te Manu Korohi reporter Lee Marama McLaughlin has more.
The marae trustees decided after the hui that they would welcome John Key on Te Ti, despite a majority of people at that hui voting against him coming. Te Whai Harawira says she phoned the Prime Minister's office to invite him. But Mr Key's office says it has not received formal confirmation that he's been invited. John Key also said he would not come if he could not speak. The marae says he's been invited to speak, and while it's holding another hui tonight, that's to discuss security on the day. Ko li Marama McLaughlin, TNA.
Auckland council workers are being told to avoid the city centre if they can during demonstrations against the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Several protests in Hikoi are expected on Thursday to march up Queen Street and end at Sky City, where the agreement is to be signed. The council has advised staff that if they can work somewhere other than at their headquarters near Sky City, then they should. Its Chief Operating Officer Dean Kimpton says that's to avoid disruption rather than concern about safety.
The reason that we are encouraging staff to think about where they might choose to work, if they've got that option, is for two reasons. One is we want to minimise disruption, and the second one is we're anticipating thousands of people in the central city. We think it's a prudent thing to do.
However, Dean Kimpton says there will be security guards posted at 2 nearby council offices on the day. Texas Senator Ted Cruz, a fiery conservative loathed by his party's leaders, has beaten billionaire Donald Trump and Florida Senator Marco Rubio in Iowa's Republican caucuses. Among the Democrats, Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders are deadlocked in a tight race. Senator Cruz's victory is a harsh blow to Mr. Trump, the vocal real estate mogul who's riled the Republican field for months. He says it's a victory for the grassroots.
The Republican nominee and the next president of the United States will not be chosen by the media, will not be chosen by the Washington establishment, will not be chosen by the lobbyists.
Senator Cruz spent months wooing the state's influential conservative and evangelical leaders. The Deerstalkers Association is rejecting criticism of a trophy hunting auction in Las Vegas, which features 28 New Zealand hunts. The American-based Humane Society International says the money raised by Safari Club International this week will be used to kill endangered and vulnerable species. The association's president, Bill O'Leary, says the reaction to the auction is a storm in a teacup and people need to fully understand the issue. Mr O'Leary says the majority of the money raised is used for conservation. He says any hunts undertaken are legal and the animals are not endangered in the country they take place in. The Crown plans to call the husband of the woman it says is at the centre of a multi-million-dollar mortgage ramping scam as a witness. Ellie Devoy, also known as Ellie Stone, is on trial with two of her brothers, Mehrdad and Mehrzad Gulbani, and her sister-in-law Nazrim Kadani, a family friend Javad Torabay, and another man with name suppression. Edward Gay reports from the Auckland District Court.
Ms Devoy has been described as being at the hub of the offending and faces 19 charges of obtaining by deception as well as using false documents. The others face various charges of obtaining by deception. The Crown Prosecutor Todd Simmons said in his opening Warren Devoy would be one of the 50 witnesses called. He said members of the group would buy houses, usually at mortgagee sales, and then sell them on to associates at ramped up prices. Documents such as deposit slips and wages were falsified in order to trick banks into lending more than $5.8 million. At the Auckland District Court, Edward Gay.
The Bulla District Council says the community is concerned that public safety will be put at risk under a planned review of police services on the West Coast. The Acting Chief Executive, Craig Scanlon, says the council will facilitate a public meeting in Westport on Thursday to discuss the proposed changes. Details of the review released last week for consultation include plans to axe Karamia's only police officer. In sport, Australia's informed batsman Usman Khawaja has been left out of Australia's one-day cricket side to face the Black Caps in Auckland tomorrow. In his last 5 outings in all forms of the game, Khawaja has averaged 90 runs, but the Australian captain Steve Smith has instead opted for Shaun Marsh to open the batting in place of the injured Aaron Finch. Smith says Khawaja is likely to play in one of the ODIs before the Test series against New Zealand starts later this month.
He does need a hit going into what's a big test series for us, and he's batting extremely well, so he's unlucky to miss out, but Sean's going to get the first opportunity as he played well in Australia and he's batting extremely well as well, so he's getting the first opportunity.
Steve Smith has also opted for 4 pacemen in the opening ODI, while the Black Caps captain Brendan McCullum has hinted he may include more than one spin option. The Tour de France champion Chris Froome hopes cycling's first confirmed case of motorised doping prompts more checks. An electric motor was found inside the bike frame of an under-23 rider in the last few days at the World Cyclocross Championships in Belgium. Froome says his bike has been checked and dismantled at least a dozen times over the last couple of seasons. And the former All Black midfielder Rennie Ranger has been given the all-clear to play for the Blues in their Super Rugby pre-season match against the Melbourne Rebels on Thursday, after spending 10 months on the sidelines following neck surgery. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, the Greek island odyssey of Lindamara. Donkeys, blue skies, white buildings, and not a smashed plate in sight. Part 3 of our window on the World Series on diabetes takes us to the Bronx in New York. And this week's pundit is Eric Crampton with some largely laissez-faire thoughts on digital media, Netflix, copyright and censorship. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, it's all after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met Service weather to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula, fine spells, isolated light showers developing tonight. Waikato to Whanganui, including Bay of Plenty in the central high country, fine spells, isolated showers during the afternoons and evenings. Manawatu to Kapiti, mostly cloudy but some fine breaks in the afternoons. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Wellington, fine with areas of morning cloud and a few light morning showers about East Cape. Marlborough, Nelson, Buller, Westland and Canterbury, fine apart from isolated showers about the ranges during the afternoons and evenings. Fiordland and Stewart Island, mostly cloudy with patchy drizzle, clearing from Stewart Island tomorrow morning and from Fiordland in the evening. Southland and Otago, mainly fine but isolated showers during the afternoons and evenings, and the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. It's almost 6:08.
Thanks so much, Katrina. Jane Kelsey has just come in and sat down beside us while Katrina was reading the weather. Unfazed by it completely. Jane, we're just going to have a quick cross to Wellington, then we're going to talk to you live in the studio. Thanks for joining us. Our political reporter Benedict Collins is standing by, though. WorkSafe New Zealand says prosecuting farmers would not be a productive way of improving safety in the agricultural sector. This is something that Helen Kelly was talking about on the program last week. The comments were made at a parliamentary select committee today. 20 people died in the sector in the year to July 2015, more than 40% of all the workplace deaths in New Zealand. Benedict Collins joins us now. Benedict, what was said?
Yeah, g'day. Yeah, so the chairman and the chief executive of WorkSafe New Zealand, they said their emphasis is really on education, trying to educate farmers and farm workers about safety, not on the prosecution side. They said they don't think prosecuting farmers would help improve things in the sector. And they spoke about how they meet with the heads of Federated Farmers and Dairy New Zealand and Beef and Lamb and groups like that regularly. And they also spoke about their Safer Farms or Safe Farms program. And that sort of, I think 5,000 people during that period had gone to Safer Farms roadshows around the country. And I just flicked through the Safer Farms information. They have everything from, how to operate quad bikes safely and how to use chemicals safely, all those sorts of things.
So WorkSafe were really front-footing this. What was the reaction of MPs hearing this pitch?
Well, several of their jaws seemed to hit the floor. They were quite amazed that WorkSafe, the regulator, was saying it didn't think that prosecuting farmers would help improve the situation. I spoke to Sue Moroney. She told me she was appalled. She thinks that farm workers out there, they need to know that WorkSafe has got their back, and when it's indicating it doesn't want to prosecute farmers, she thinks it's sending a sign there that they don't have their back. I also spoke to Denise Roach after the select committee, and she told me she too was concerned. She wonders whether WorkSafe is sort of intimidated by the powerful farming lobby in New Zealand.
Okay, Benedict Collins, thank you so much. Benedict Collins live from our gallery office with the team working hard behind him. 10 minutes past 6. The TPP signing is a couple of days away. As we know, we've looked at this in length and already tonight. And security preparations are now taking place at the Vineyard Sky City in Auckland. Details about the timing of Thursday's signing remain secret, though it's being reported in overseas media bizarrely. But the Māori welcome for the 12 trade ministers will be small and simple. Just 3 or 4 people will perform following discontent about the controversial trade pact. Auckland University law professor and TPP opponent Jane Kelsey joins me in the studio now. Jane, welcome.
Thank you.
Boy, there's so much to discuss. Did you hear Todd McClay on the program last night?
Yes, I did.
Okay, so Todd McClay is saying if we're not there, it's trouble. The exclusion is a disaster for the economy and therefore the country. Why do you think he's wrong?
Well, if we look at the government statements right from the beginning, in the first place, this was going to be the gold standard for the 21st century, and we'd walk away if there wasn't complete removal of all of the restrictions, especially on agriculture.
That's the opening gambit in the negotiation, surely, that kind of pitch, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, but if you look at the progressive shifts over time, now we've got, oh, well, it was the best that we could do, and even worse than that, we've got, well, it's not actually that great, but we can't afford not to be at the table.
So would you have supported the TPP if it was the gold standard, as described early on?
No, because what the government and the cheerleaders have always focused on is the very small part of this that is a real trade agreement. You've got 30 chapters in this treaty. 25 of them are actually about policy and regulatory areas that are the real domain of an elected parliament. And that's what many people have objected to in this agreement, because it takes those handcuffs on governments even further than previous agreements have done, privileges foreign states and foreign investors, and allows them to enforce those rules, not in our courts, but in offshore tribunals. And that's what I think people find most offensive.
I think, to paraphrase what Todd McClay was saying last night, he's saying your hypothesis is based upon the worst possible scenario. That is that everything that can go wrong will go wrong. And he says it won't go wrong. Does the ISDS system provide you with reassurance about protecting government and sovereignty?
Absolutely not. And this agreement goes further than our previous, for example, one with China. Not only does it go further, but China, because of a provision in that agreement, actually gets the goodies out of this one. So people who are upset not just about the US investors, but about Chinese investors here, have actually got the worst of both worlds there. Even some of the most vociferous advocates of investor-state disputes admit that the TPPA has done virtually nothing to address concerns, and it goes further than previous agreements.
Isn't, though, that the cost of entering into an agreement like this? And if we look at Europe, they are now trying to do something similar, right? TTIP, transatlantic, not trans-Pacific. If it's so bad, why are the Europeans trying to do it?
Well, I don't think you should hold your breath about TTIP happening anytime soon. I was up in Berlin a couple of months ago, and the discussions that were taking place there were certainly that investor-state disputes, which are now discredited internationally, would be the falling point for the TTIP agreement. But there are many other issues. There's issues such as GE and biotech issues. There's issues that deal with similar arguments we've had here about access to pharmaceuticals. There are issues about the protection of jobs and the offshoring of jobs that would occur. And so there are real problems. I think you're aware that there was an economist study that came out from Tufts University just recently, and that said these agreements are notorious because of their distributional impacts. They are not benefits that are distributed equally. There are jobs that are net losses, and there are distributional consequences that mean that the most vulnerable are the ones that lose most.
Is this an ideological discussion? In other words, are the literal words of the TPP, and there are so many of them, in the margins, and the debate is taking place around these agreements in general terms? In other words, proponents love them, opponents hate them, full stop.
I think there is a meta discourse, which is what kind of 21st century do you want to live in? Do you want to live in one that is neoliberal, that is driven by the interests of US corporations, and in particular it is US corporations, because the US is quite clear this is about making the rules.
Although lots of New Zealand corporations are saying, yeehaw, let us at it.
No, not lots of New Zealand corporations are saying that. There are a few lobby groups who came out with a letter today, for example, but I understand a couple of the chambers of commerce actually declined to sign that letter. There's a lot of whipping going on because they know that this is not a popular deal. But to go back to your question about the big picture, yes, there are problems with the big picture. There's problems about the power of corporations. There's problems about the secrecy and the trust us democracy. There's problems about elected governments not being able to decide in a way that they're mandated to what's good in the future. But there's a lot of detail as well, and we've been working really hard, not only when we've had the leaked texts throughout the 5 years of negotiations, to analyse what they really mean, which the government wouldn't tell people, but also since the text was released to produce expert peer-reviewed papers on the economy, on investment, on environment and climate change, doing the job the government should have done so New Zealanders can be informed.
Professor Jane Kelsey, law professor and TPP opponent, thank you so much for joining us in the studio tonight. Gosh, this polarises opinion, this agreement. We would love to hear from you no matter what side you're on. Businesses, what kind of day are they going to have? Some disruption expected, predicted, who knows, in the heart of Auckland CBD on Thursday. Several groups of protesters are expected to descend upon the signing at Sky City, coming along Queen Street. Muriel Baker reports.
A barista at a cafe close by, Tavita, says Sky City staff have advised them to close up for the day of the protest and bring their furniture inside. However, Tavita says they'll stay open as protests tend to be good for business.
They just brings us a bit of business. They need a bit of energy, so it does make a little bit of like distraction. Like you can hear them like banging away and being a bit of a nuisance, but it doesn't affect us too much.
Auckland Council's Chief Operating Officer Dean Kimpton says it'll be business as usual at their headquarters near Sky City, but he is wary of the possible disruption for their staff and councillors.
The only expectation we have of staff and councillors on where they work on Thursday is that if they're able to work from another location, they do so, and we've got offices all throughout the city, and our objective there is simply to allow people to continue to work in a low disruption environment.
He says a workshop for 21 councillors and support staff, scheduled at the nearby town hall, may be moved to Manukau to avoid disruption, but that decision hasn't been made yet. The Chamber of Commerce head, Michael Barnett, says disruption from protesters is inevitable, but he says Auckland coped with major political events over the decades, and those with a point to make should be heard.
They're responsible voices. They should be given an opportunity to voice their concerns. You'd like to think that they'll respect those that have a different opinion. You'd like to think that they will respect the platform off which they're doing that, and that's Auckland City, where there's Auckland businesses operating.
Some local businesses along the planned protest route are just as pragmatic.
We're going to wait and see what it's like to begin with. We are going to be very aware of it, of what's happening, and we are aware of the fact that it's happening.
Often they have like police with the protests anyway, so it's often quite controlled.
I haven't heard anything about that, sorry.
So you didn't know there was a protest coming?
Yeah, no.
Do you get extra customers?
Sometimes when they finish, they lose too much energy,
The police have declined to be interviewed by RNZ, but in a statement they say they're responsible for all aspects of safety and security for the event. They say police from other districts are being brought in to boost their numbers. For Checkpoint, Muriel Baker.
Let's head to Wellington, Shelley Bay. If you know Wellington, you'll know it well. Some Taranaki whānui iwi members are concerned that an iwi employee is handling votes on a controversial proposal to sell land at Shelley Bay. In the capital, the tribal body Port Nicholson Block Settlement Trust needs 75% of its voters to agree before it can sell its largest asset, that land on the coast there. Magic spot. Te Manu Korihi reporter Lee Marama McLaughlin has more.
Strong interest in the plan has meant an extra hui is being held in Auckland tomorrow before voting closes next Tuesday. Andrew Meffam has been to all three hui so far, but it's what happened at a meeting in Lower Hutt last week that raised alarm bells for him.
At the end of the hui, the chairman stood up and actually referred to a ballot box that was at the back of the house, and he said that anyone with ballots that they wanted to post, they could put it in the box at the back. Now, one of the employees of the trust stood up and waved around a plastic box, a plastic container, that was unsecured and basically showed everyone this is where you put your ballots.
That employee, Ben Jameson, has been working for Port Nicholson since 2013 and was appointed by the Trust to be the voting representative and take the ballots at the hui. Anthony Morton from elections.com says the employee is not a registered member of Taranaki Whānui, so the Trust isn't breaking any rules.
It's usually left to the organisation to arrange their voting representative. In this case, the voting representative doesn't have a voting right themselves, so we're as happy as we can be that that's a good process for them to follow for this information hui round.
The Trust's finances have dropped from $25 to $17.5 million since settling its treaty claim in 2009. It's currently the subject of an inquiry by the Serious Fraud Office. Mr Meffam says having a staff member taking votes is not a good look.
In this instance, where the employee has a direct relationship to the commercial board and the decision to sell Shelley Bay, I don't believe they should have a role in gathering votes. I do see a conflict of interest. It's not a legal one, I think it's more of a moral one.
But an iwi trustee, Holden Hohaia, says it's not necessarily inappropriate.
Perhaps it would be wiser to have an employee of elections.com physically present in managing that process, but I mean, provided those protocols are followed, I think you can, within reason, still have that objectivity as long as that person managing the ballot box is not a Taranaki Whānui member. You've got a suitable sort of separation there.
RNZ was copied into emails where other iwi members expressed concerns last month about votes being taken at the hui in Lower Hutt. The Trust Chief Executive Jason Fox said then the process was above board and that voting would continue at the following hui in Wellington, which was held Thursday last week. But the ballot box was not seen at that hui and Mr Fox could not be reached to explain why. Anthony Morton from elections.com says the bulk of the votes on whether to sell Shelley Bay will be cast at the final meeting in Wellington next week. He says he will be handling those votes. For Checkpoint, ko Lee Marama McLaughlin tēnei.
Kia ora Lee, coming up on World Watch PM at 6:30. This is a new feature, half an hour a night with John Greaves. The French Foreign Minister says that if a new peace initiative proposed by France between Israel and the Palestinians doesn't succeed, France would have no choice but to recognise a Palestinian state. That's good news for a senior executive member of the Palestinian Legislative Council. And she'll be talking with John Greaves in an exclusive New Zealand interview for World Watch PM. John Greaves coming up with World Watch PM in about 6.5 minutes. 2 Auckland women have launched a cooking program in conjunction with one of the country's biggest after-school care providers in a bid to help children learn to cook healthy food. Rebecca Wolfall and Susie Tay-Bradley have launched Food Storm, a program developed to meet Heart Foundation guidelines, will be rolled out through after-school care program SKIDS, Safe Kids in Daily Supervision, which has the potential to reach more than 5,000 New Zealand children immediately across all deciles. The women have already had Labour's health spokesperson Annette King along to class, and Susie says their next goal is to get Health Minister Jonathan Coleman along. They'd like to see it rolled out across every primary school, either in after-school care or as part of the curriculum.
We want to get every kid in New Zealand cooking, learning to cook, learning to have a good relationship with their food, and really learning how to make healthy food.
Learning what's in their food, right?
Absolutely.
Are you surprised about how little children know about what they're eating? Bex?
Absolutely. I think the key thing with cooking is that kinesthetic hands-on learning, and so when they're actually putting in the ingredients into their bowl, they can actually see for themselves what they're putting in their food.
How much sugar's going in, for example.
Exactly, and they can start to make decisions. Do I really want to put in a tablespoon of sugar? No, I don't. Maybe I can use some berries instead for that natural sugar.
Okay, so the idea is to associate with SKIDS, which is the after-school care program, right?
Yes.
Right.
And how are you going doing that?
Well, we've developed a really great program called Food Storm, and that is comprised of 13 recipes. And we have bundled this little program together that we can then sell to SKIDS franchisees, and they can come to the training, buy the program, and run it in their own sites. And that's potentially reaching 5,000 kids.
And then you have a loftier ambition, which is to get it to every child.
Absolutely. In New Zealand schools, yes.
Primary schools or any age?
Yes, primary schools.
Okay, give me an example of a recipe. What do you do? I can see a classic spag bowl there, obviously a real New Zealand favourite. Yeah. What else?
Okay, so the program was developed with essential recipes that we thought actually everyone should know, but it's such a fundamental age, primary school, for these kids to grab hold of it and engage. So it's the perfect age and the perfect audience. So these are 13 recipes that they should know. And so you've got your basic scrambled eggs, you've got your soup, you've got a fish pie. So you're learning about a white sauce, how to make a white sauce.
Baked beans, homemade baked beans.
Homemade baked beans.
With a homemade tomato sauce with them.
Absolutely. You've got... we think every kid should know how to make a cake for mum and dad for their birthdays, but this is a cake fuelled by natural sugars.
Now, are you surprised how few children know how to do this stuff now?
Absolutely. We run our own cooking classes, and there's so many kids who come in and they're almost so hesitant. They don't know if they're allowed to just get involved, and they can't believe that they can put the stuff in the bowl and mix it and tick off the ingredients, and it gives them such a huge sense of accomplishment to be able to do that. But no, I'm surprised that there aren't a lot of kids that know how to do it. I mean, even our kids' friends who come over and they watch our kids cooking, and they just stand there and they don't understand. They don't know how to do it at all. They just are not given the opportunity.
What about the parents? What's their engagement when the kids are coming home with a sense of empowerment in the kitchen, an understanding of recipes, and a desire to contribute in the kitchen?
I think,
incredible.
I think the great thing about this program is it's a dual kind of attraction. You've got the parents that want them best for their kids, so they want them to be out eating healthy food, and then you've got the children at the other end that actually want to do it because of the fun. There's a lot of fun with this. I mean, we don't just call it spag bowl, we call it hearty spag bowl. It's got a face, it's shaped like a heart, and then you've got the capsicum heart in the middle. Got eyes on things. I mean, that's the fun, and that's how the children become engaged.
And because they're making it from scratch, because they understand the ingredients, because they're thinking about everything, then it is complete and utterly opposite to the kind of processed foods that...
Yes, absolutely. And there's joy. In all of the pictures that we see of the children in the class, there's this huge smile, and we're not making it up, it's for real, smile and pride.
They
of what they've done.
So proud, and because they've made it and they're around the food, they want to eat it. And the parents come to us and say, "I can't believe they're eating this now."
Now, one of the problems, of course, is that food from scratch is time-consuming because you've got to go and buy all the ingredients, and also it can be expensive. I mean, it's probably more expensive to make baked beans at home than it is to buy a can of them. So, how are you addressing the money concerns, the money issues here?
These are all standard pantry items in this particular Food Storm program, designed with budget in mind. We only have one meat dish in there. Everything else should be stuff that should be in the pantry. Bread is it's yeast, the power of yeast, wholemeal bread, apples, stuff from the local veggie guy, or even from your own garden.
I have a sense that lots of children will be seeing and working with yeast for the first time, right?
That's magnificent. I love yeast.
Very exciting to see it bubbling away.
It's just, I made pita bread over the holidays, which I've never made, and that's a tablespoon of yeast.
So what decile schools are you targeting? Across the board, or all of them?
All schools.
Across the board. Because it's Skids who's running out this program, it depends on, they might not want to charge, or they might charge. Depends on their decile.
Rebecca Wilfall and Susie Tate-Bradley. Health Minister Jonathan Coleman tells us he's seeking advice from the ministry about whether the program can be rolled out across primary schools. What do you think? We'd love your feedback. 45 seconds to go. What an incredible day it's been throughout the world. Sanders-Clinton, basically 50-50. Clinton has it over Sanders by about a third, 0.4 of a point. That is absolutely fascinating. Cruz trumped Trump. Trump says that he can handle that. He wasn't expecting it. That's Check's Point for this evening. Thanks for joining us on your radio, your television, online, or however you choose to connect with us today. You can hear highlights of all of Radio New Zealand shows on Late Edition at 10:15 this evening. Any of our stories are available on rnz.co.nz/checkpoint. From the excellent Checkpoint team, who we can see right now inside the control room, good night.
You're listening to RNZ National, where it's 6:30. Welcome to Watch. I'm John Greaves. Tonight, the Zika virus is declared a public health emergency. One of the most powerful people in the PLO talks exclusively to World Watch on peace in the Middle East. And the UK gives the green light to genetically modify human embryos. Those stories and more in World Watch PM. But first, the United Nations Special Envoy on Syria, Staffan de Mistura, has held talks with representatives of the country's main opposition groups, describing the meeting as the official beginning of the Geneva peace negotiations. The delegation had initially called for a lifting of sieges, an end to airstrikes and the release of prisoners, demands which haven't been met, as Imogen Fuchs reports from Geneva.
The fact that both the Syrian government and the opposition are now in Geneva and taking part in talks with the UN, albeit separately, is a positive sign. But opposition demands for humanitarian measures to coincide with the start of talks have not been met. Instead, the fighting seems to be intensifying. And so, at the close of his talks with the opposition, the UN Special Envoy Staffan de Mistura made clear his support for immediate steps to help Syrian civilians.
The Syrian people, while we are having Syrian talks, they deserve to hear and see facts on the ground in reduction the violence and the fact of the besieged areas. When I meet the Syrian people, they tell me, please don't just have a conference, have also something that we can see and touch while you are meeting in Geneva.
Mr. de Mistura also called on world powers to push for a ceasefire. Diplomats from the United States and Russia did meet in Geneva on the sidelines of the talks, but said publicly only that they had agreed to remain in close contact. Meanwhile, the UN negotiations, with the Syrian government in the morning and the opposition in the afternoon, continue.
The BBC's Imogen Fuchs. Well, Ted Cruz has won the Iowa caucuses for the Republicans, the first contest that actually counts in the 2016 American presidential nominating race.
Iowa has sent notice that the Republican nominee and the next president of the United States will not be chosen by the media. Will not be chosen by the Washington establishment. Will not be chosen by the lobbyists. But will be chosen by the most incredible, powerful force where all sovereignty resides in our nation, by we, the people, the American people.
Ahead of the event, Donald Trump was in the lead. Trump tried to put a positive spin on his second-place finish.
I'm just honored. I'm really honored. And I want to congratulate Ted, and I want to congratulate all of the incredible candidates, including Mike Huckabee, who's become a really good friend of mine. So congratulations to everybody. Congratulations.
The former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee is suspending his campaign, and the man who virtually tied with Donald Trump, Marco Rubio, is seen as a much stronger choice leaving Iowa. He put the focus on the Democrats.
2016 is not just a choice between two political parties. 2016 is a referendum. It is a referendum on our identity as a nation and as a people. In America, there are only two ways forward for us now. We can either be greater than we've ever been, or we can be a great nation in decline.
As for the Democrat camp, numbers are tight. With 94% of the vote counted, Hillary Clinton has 49.9%, while her competitor, Bernie Sanders, is on 49.6%. Clinton spoke to her supporters without really claiming victory.
There is so much at stake in this election. I don't need to tell you. Every single one of you who came out for me, who worked so many hours, from my young organizers with energy and